Day after day declines, and still we are as strangers to each other. Your image is before me constantly in my waking moments and in mine hour of dreams, and yet the whole history of your thoughts is to me as a sealed fountain. I often see the rosy light of your cheek, the gloss of your curls, and the glory of your features. I mark the blush steal to your forehead as your eye, for a moment, rests upon mine, and in another moment see the dark lash and white lid tremble above it as it is bent abashed and timid to the earth. Must we never meet, Geraldine? Is the romance with which these letters have kindled in your bosom to pass away forever? Must that young and unpracticed heart pour all its wealth of affections into the bosom of another? Must that fair cheek and that small hand and that red lip all glow and trill at the embrace of another? Is it in vain that I have hovered around you as your shadow, watching every change of countenance and blah blah blah? A whole bunch of garbage from a man to a woman he is never going to meet. The story of Harold and Geraldine was originally published in the Philadelphia Album and Ladies' Literary Gazette in 1830, and it's a whole mess that plenty of readers at the time felt the need to comment on, and I will be making my own comments later. I am Olympia Stoker, your friendly local vampiric moth scholar, and today we're exploring 1800s love letters in print media while we put together an aesthetic journal page or two. For each page I do, I'll be working in quotes and bits of information found in these supposed love letters. The actual romance is dubious at best, which is fine. Kind of. Not really. Let's be honest. They published these and put them on blast for a reason. But before we get into the love letters, let's set the foundation for what we're working with. First, print media is finally catching on in 1800s America. It's getting real popular and everyone wants a piece of that potential cash cow, especially in the cities. Rural areas are still a lot iffier in regards to print media and newspaper, but the city folk love them. It was a one-stop shop for all the local, national, and international gossip. Second, love letters were a fundamental part of the courtship process in the 1800s, specifically in England and America. An important thing to know about courtship in the 18th century is that there were finally expectations that marriage would be built upon a foundation of love, rather than the interest of financial stability or the pursuit of economic growth. Parents stopped making the decisions for their children, which meant that courtship became much more prominent in the pursuit of love. And with courtship came declarations of love and attempts to woo. Women took this decision of a husband seriously, because realistically, it was one of the few ways that they could exercise their autonomy. By the 19th century, aka the 1800s, this had become pretty standard. Paired with the encouragement of writing personal letters to acquaintances and friends, love letters became an inevitability. With the meteoric rise of print culture, these letters were somewhat readily published, even though it was a non-traditional way to present said letters. Not only were love letters published, but pieces of poetry for their pursuit were also published. Poetry was one of the few areas that women were just as happy to write in, and more often than not, publish once they overcame their reluctance. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was one of these women, writing a sonnet for her husband. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling is out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. I love thee to the level of everyday's most quiet need by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. In fact, it was her husband who encouraged her to publish this sonnet and others, which ended up becoming fairly popular. It's worth noting that love letters didn't used to be silly, yeah? They were serious declarations of adoration and love, like the sonnet I just read. As funny as it would have been to receive a letter like, "Do you love me? Check the right box, yes or yes." They were a lot more serious affairs. It was expected to be a place where one poured out their intimate feelings. It could be dusted with perfume, kissed, and handed over with such gentle care. Women's letters were often more reserved and modest, reflective of society's expectations for them, whereas men's were more poetic and self-reflective, often trailing on and on as they explored their feelings and tried to justify why they would have been the best match. However, as intimate and serious as they were, if you were to give a letter, you could bet every last shred of pride and shame that you might have that the person receiving it would share it with their entire family and all of their friends. Now, it wasn't just the upper and upper middle classes who wrote love letters. We know this because of a letter written by Reuben Bluejoint in the Album and Ladies Weekly Gazette. It was republished from another paper, the American Patriot, in 1826. It's a lot harder to understand the slight illiteracy given that it's written phonetically, so I'll throw it up on the screen while we read it. It's short, sweet, and to the point, unlike other letters we'll get into. My charming Lucy, I take this opportunity to let you know that I am desperately in love with you, and as father says, I am old enough for to be married, and as mother says, that help is dear. Why, I can't help thinking that if you and I could set our houses together, we might do as well as most folks who can't do no better. And as you know, I'm a fine-spoken person, and not used for to write, Billy does, or any such like things, and can't say no pretty things about darts and hearts and Cupid, and other matters of that nature. I shall trust entirely for your generosity, and subscribe myself, lovely Lucy, your true lover and sincere friend till death. It's sweet, it's to the point, and it lacks the poetics of other letters written by men. In fact, Reuben's letter differs so much from what's traditionally expected that it's more likely that Reuben rarely, if ever, interacted with the upper classes and didn't know the social expectations. Still, that doesn't make his sentiment any less kind. He points out that they're both good to be wed, that they could do relatively well together, and he doesn't know much about poetics and romance, but he'll be there for her as a friend or as a lover. The mess I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Harold and Geraldine, yeah, we're about to get into that one. Safe to say, Harold didn't know when to stop, but at least Geraldine kept standing her ground. In his first letter of the 1830 edition of the Philadelphia Album and Ladies Literary Gazette, officially published on January 9th, 1830, Harold wrote to Geraldine, praising her beauty and grace in the hopes that it would woo her to his side. Propriety, I know, is the index of character in a female, and I would not have you depart from its lightest rule, Geraldine, even to gratify my own persona vanity. But for many months I have watched your actions narrowly, and feel convinced that delicacy never had a purer shine than in your bosom. In this respect you are far superior to your sisters. You are younger, and your actions now take the color of your hair. That heart is a timid and gentle one, but I know it is rich in the deepest affections. I read its mysterious workings in the burning loveliness of your full blue eyes, in the pure and heavenly expression of your features, and in the unsullied whiteness of your forehead that seems a mirror for the soul. I do not wish to flatter, for I know female possessed of far more beauty than you possess. But for all this you are the beau ideal of my fancy, and your image the creature of my dreams, nursed and consecrated amid the inner and shadow places of my heart, the object of my passions and the theme of my thoughts. What is sweet sentiment, Harold? Not at all mildly disturbing or upsetting in any capacity. It's so shocking that this didn't win over Geraldine immediately. After all, we all know that women love it when you refer to them as a female, and that you are low-key stalking us. Geraldine's response to this letter comes in the January 23rd, 1830 publication. She keeps it a lot shorter than Harold does in his letters, and she wasn't happy. At all. But what shall I say of the present, the age in which woman is treated with so much indignity? My soul is up in arms to see my sex so trampled upon and abused, and the want of spirit and helplessness with which they endure it. Take an instance in your letter, to which this is intended as somewhat of a reply. You say, the hidden depths and mysterious windings of a woman's love are as familiar to thee as an open scroll. I know her character fully, and well do I know her weaknesses and her strength. If you know all this, you know a great deal, and must have been what the world calls in love more than once. Well, what man has not? As things are, I can hardly blame you for doing as others, that is, falling in love with every pretty face you meet. In another line you say, I have sought for a virgin and a virgin's affections that have never been appropriated even in thought. How dare you ask such a thing as virgin affections, you who pretend such a knowledge of a woman, as could not have been gained but by experience? Oh, vanity of vanities, what an age we do live in. She goes further to insult and rip apart his letter before finally winding off in one of the best possible ways. oh man, to what will your pride of might lead you? It is not enough that in common concerns of life, we submit to be governed by the laws you choose to make for us, but you must descend into the heart also and attempt to control its affections. Poor silly creatures that we are, you condescend to notice us, and we must be grateful. You prefer us for a time, and we must of course accept you. Well, we become your wives. What then? Is our condition changed? Yes, it is. Instead of the admiration you professed for us and the love you swore before marriage, we must be content as the butt of your abuse and the object of your indifference. The highly favored creature, which you exalted to the enviable situation of your wife, is allowed the inestimable privilege of sitting at home whole evenings and days, a prey to her own melancholy thoughts and reflections, while your time is spent elsewhere and in other company, as it is well, if not in debauchery and dissipation. Safe to say, the first letter didn't really win Geraldine over. Neither did the second, in which Harold ignores literally everything that Geraldine has said and opts to instead refer to her as gentle and sweet, something her last letter showed she very much was not. Instead, he begs God to keep her pure and fair and sweet forever, instead of growing into an old hag like every other woman. Because, you know, Harold has bad taste and can't appreciate a good MILF. Jokes aside, Harold continuously puts Geraldine onto a pedestal, and clearly didn't read the issues she had at all. He continues with the same foppy and foolish poetics, and that's the last letter Geraldine responds to. Or at least the last one that actually gets published. Her response is longer, berating, and filled with pure gold. I am sufficiently candid to admit that I have read some of your letters with pleasure, anticipated them all with impatience, but have turned away with scorn and disgust from the vain and reckless tenor of your many remarks. Besides this, you have repeatedly insulted my understanding by the false and absurd character of your adulation. You cannot suppose for a moment, Harold, that a woman could be other than an idiot who would believe half the absurdities you have uttered in reference to myself. Inasmuch, therefore, you have written what you yourself did not believe, and what, in accordance with a rational judgment, you could not expect an intelligent female to believe. You must esteem me a semi-idiot or design to insult me. She continues to tear down his praises for her, painting them as a mockery of real and meaningful praise, and rounds off her letter by writing, "Thus far, you have nothing to hope from me in point of affection. If it will afford you any satisfaction, my heart is, and ever has been, my own." And that is the last letter that you will find from Geraldine in the Philadelphia Album and Ladies' Literary Gazette. However, it's very much not the last piece from Harold, who continues to publish his love letters to Geraldine, though this time to no response. She has turned him down, and she is determined to let the matter die, even if Harold would rather keep it unhappily alive and struggling for even the smallest glance of affection. Again, in his next letter, Harold ignores literally everything that Geraldine wrote and instead writes back, I have read your letter again and again with wild excitement. Vain, self-sufficient, and reckless as I may have been, or am, I never imagined I had excited half the interest in your bosom which exists. You have never bowed at the altar of affection. You do not hate me. You are not utterly cold in your disposition, and I am happy, happier now in anticipation of your affections than I would have been in their possessions. Are we shocked Geraldine stopped responding? Are we really? It's no wonder that a later reader wrote the assessment that the letters between Harold and Geraldine appeared to be the visionary effusions of an inmate in the Pennsylvania hospital, or at least a promising candidate for the cell in that benevolent institution. The benevolence of the institution is questionable at best, but yeah, get some help, bro. Even when Harold finally wraps off his letters by admitting that Geraldine will probably never come to him and their affections are basically dead in the water, he still admits that he's angry that her affections were never returned. Unlike Peter Plainman, though, he doesn't end his letter with threats or anything of the sort. Instead, he ends it off with well wishes and hopes that whoever has the luck of wedding Geraldine is worthy of her affections. Which would be sweet if he wasn't completely off his rocker for nearly a year. The story between Harold and Geraldine held readers' attentions rapt, to the point where the editors made regular comments about whether or not it would be appearing in specific periodical issues and to what capacity. Readers would write in with their own comments and observations, something that seems to have been relatively unusual for other love letters in question. And mind you, none of these love letters are typical. As we've established, usually love letters were given to a person of your affections, and they were highly intimate affairs in the courtship process. Publishing them in the local newspaper doesn't seem to be a particularly intimate thing to do, unless you are really trying to shout from the rooftops what your love is, or you want to maintain some semblance of anonymity. As we wrap up, let's take a final look at the finished junk journal pages. I tried to keep these supposed love letters in mind while I was making each page, and as you look at them, you might see small segments from each letter I've written down. I think romance can provide really great aesthetics, especially when it's not super traditional, something we saw in these letters. You might be asking whether or not these letters are genuinely real. It's perfectly feasible that they're fake. Fake stories and the like are hardly unusual, but readers took them as genuine. There are also comments from the editors, at least in Harold's case, that they knew Harold personally, and he delivered letters to them by hand. So in some capacity, they were real. They provided real experiences and real entertainment. They deviated from the tradition of intimate courtship for something more public, a public declaration of love and of their viability as a suitor. They are more than just untraditional in content, they are also untraditional in presentation. Love letters were not common in print media during this time period, but they did appear, obviously. Their non-traditional appearance speaks to the prevalence of print media in daily life, and it speaks to the revolutionary time period. In a post-Revolutionary War America, people were clearly up for a lot of change, be it political, familial, or social. There's not really some huge lesson to take away from these love letters, aside from be genuine and don't try to beat a dead horse. If the person you're pursuing says no, don't try to be like Harold and insist you can see they're lying to themselves. If you like this video, feel free to like, leave a comment, subscribe for more content. All my sources are in my description, as well as links to where you can follow me in other places. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day.